The smell of fresh-cut roses and warm vanilla frosting drifted through the banquet hall, and for a moment I let myself believe the evening was going to be perfect. My brother Marcus had just been named Regional Director of the Year by his company, the youngest person in the organization's 40-year history to hold the title. My mother was crying already, the good kind, the kind she saved for moments she'd been quietly rehearsing in her heart for years. My father stood beside her with his hand on her shoulder, his chest broad with a pride he wouldn't have known how to put into words even if you'd handed him a dictionary. And Marcus himself stood at the center of it all, easy in his suit, laughing at something one of his colleagues said, his whole presence radiating the particular warmth of a man who had earned his place in the room. I was holding a glass of champagne. My husband's hand rested on the small of my back. Then Nathan leaned down and said very quietly, close to my ear, "Can I ask you something about your brother's resume?" I didn't move. I kept my eyes forward, kept my smile in place, kept the glass at exactly the same angle. "What do you mean?" I said, barely moving my lips. "I'll tell you later," he said, and he straightened up and reached for his own glass like nothing had happened. But I'd been married to Nathan for 3 years. I knew what his "I'll tell you later" sounded like when it was nothing, and I knew what it sounded like when it was something. This was the second kind. This was the kind that came with a stillness in his jaw, and a precision in how he set his glass back on the table. Like a man who was being very careful not to let his hands betray anything. Nathan is a forensic accountant. He has spent 15 years following paper trails through companies, nonprofits, estates, and personal finances. He has testified in federal cases. He has, on 3 separate occasions, found embezzlement that entire audit teams missed. He does not flag things casually. I picked up a dinner roll I didn't want and tore a small piece from it and placed it on my plate. "Of course," I said, later. We had driven 2 hours to be at this dinner. The venue was a hotel ballroom in the city where Marcus had built his career, decorated in his company's navy and gold. There were maybe 90 people in the room, colleagues and senior leaders, and a few of us who were family. My parents had driven up from home. My husband and I had come from our place across the state. Marcus had called me 2 weeks earlier when he found out about the award. He didn't make a big deal of it on the phone, that wasn't his way, but I could hear the satisfaction in his voice, the quiet, particular kind that comes from wanting something for a long time and finally having it arrive. "You don't have to come all the way up," he said. "We're coming," I said. "It's a long drive." "Marcus," he laughed. "Okay, yeah, I'm glad." He was 38, 4 years older than me. He had always been the one who knew what he wanted, not in a forceful way, but in the way of someone who pays close attention to his own interior life and takes it seriously. He went to school for business administration, graduated without debt because he'd worked the whole time, spent his first years in entry-level operations roles, moved up steadily. He never seemed to rush. He also never seemed to stop. By the time I was finishing college, he was already a manager. By the time I got married, he was running a regional team. He was the person I called when I needed advice that was actually useful. He was the person my parents talked about at the dinner table with a quietness that I'd recognized, even as a teenager, as something close to relief, the particular relief of parents who had been afraid for their child and then watched that fear turn out to be unnecessary. I was proud of him. That is not a complicated statement. I was proud of him, and I was happy to be in that room, and I wanted to be there when they called his name. So when Nathan leaned down and said what he said, the first thing I felt wasn't suspicion. It was a door swinging open onto a drop I hadn't known was there. The award presentation happened an hour later. A senior vice president spoke for 10 minutes about Marcus's work, the turnaround of the Western region, the retention numbers, a warehouse restructuring that had saved the company significant operating costs. She used words like visionary and relentless and quietly transformational. My mother reached over and took my hand. Marcus came to the podium and thanked the people who had believed in him. He thanked his team. He thanked our parents. He looked at our side of the room when he said it. My father nodded once, the way he did when something mattered enough that words felt inadequate. Marcus did not thank Nathan specifically, but he looked at me, and he smiled, and I smiled back, and I made sure that smile didn't waver. Afterward, during the reception, Nathan stayed close but didn't rush me. He knows how to read a room. He worked the perimeter, accepted a plate of appetizers from a passing server, made small talk with a man from Marcus's logistics team. I watched him from across the room and tried to understand what I was feeling. Dread is the wrong word. It was more like the moment before a doctor gives you results you've been waiting for. That interval of suspension where the world hasn't changed yet, but you already know, in some layer of yourself that lives below language, that it is about to. We said our goodbyes at 10. My parents were staying at the hotel. Marcus walked us to the lobby and hugged me for a long moment, longer than usual, and I held on and thought, whatever this is, I love you. That part is not complicated either. In the car, Nathan drove. I waited until we were on the highway, the city lights fading in the rearview mirror, before I said his name. Tell me. He was quiet for a moment, not stalling. I know the difference with him, but choosing how to begin. Before the dinner, he said, Marcus's company had a press release go up on their site. Announcement of the award, bio, career history. I pulled it up on my phone during cocktail hour. And his credentials list a master's degree from Whitmore University, class of 2012. I knew Marcus had a master's degree. He'd gotten it while working, the hard way, taking night courses over 3 years. I remembered the period, the late calls, the exhaustion in his voice, the way he kept going anyway. Okay, I said. Whitmore University closed in 2009, Nathan said. The highway stretched ahead of us, dark and steady. It had some extension programs that continued under a third-party provider through 2010, he continued. But the degree-granting authority was gone. Any degree dated 2012 from Whitmore doesn't exist. The institution wasn't operating. I heard myself say, maybe there's a different Whitmore. I looked, he said. I looked carefully. I turned toward the window. The trees along the highway were just dark shapes, fast and indistinct. He could have made a mistake, I said. Someone could have put the wrong school in the bio. A typo, a miscommunication with HR. That's possible, Nathan said. And he said it in a way that meant he didn't think it was likely, but he wasn't closing the door. Because he was being fair. Because that is who he is. How confident are you? I asked. He thought about it for a second. Confident enough that I'm telling you. Nathan does not tell me things until he is confident. That is not a flaw. It is, in fact, the reason I trust him. He once spent 2 additional weeks on a client case because he wanted to be certain before he made a single phone call. Certainty costs him something. He does it anyway. I didn't say anything else for a long time. He didn't push. We drove. I waited 4 days before I called Marcus. I needed those 4 days, not to decide whether to ask him. I always knew I would, but to figure out how to be a fair person about it while I waited. I went over everything I knew. The years of watching him work. The person I had seen at that podium. I tried to hold all of it at once and not let one piece crowd out the others. On the 3rd night, I sat on the back porch after Nathan was asleep and I let myself feel the thing I'd been keeping at arm's length. The fear that I had seen something true at that dinner. Something that had been real and earned, and that it was also sitting on top of something that wasn't. Both things could exist. That's the part that took me 3 nights to accept. Not the possibility that Marcus had done something wrong, but the possibility that the wrong thing and the real thing were both true at the same time. That the work was genuine. That the fraud was also genuine. That people are not simple. On the 4th day, I called him from my car, parked in the driveway, engine off. He picked up on the 2nd ring. Hey, how are you doing? Drive home okay? It was fine, I said. The dinner was beautiful. You deserved all of it. A small pause. Thank you for coming. I need to ask you about something, I said, and I need you to tell me the truth. Another pause. Longer this time. And in that pause I heard, not guilt exactly, but recognition. The sound of a person who has been expecting a door to open and is standing on the other side of it when it finally does. Okay, he said. Your master's degree, I said. From Whitmore. He didn't say anything. Nathan looked it up. The school closed before the date on your degree. The silence that followed was not the silence of someone confused or composing a defense. It was the silence of someone standing very still. Marcus. Yeah, he said finally. His voice had changed. The warmth hadn't left it. That's not the right way to describe it. It was more like the warmth was still there, but it was moving differently now, like it was coming from a different place. Yeah, I know. I closed my eyes. How long? I said. He let out a breath. Long and slow. Since I applied for the senior manager position, 7 years ago. He told me everything. I asked and he answered directly without deflection, and I understood later that this directness was itself a form of what had been building in him for a long time. The pressure of a lie maintained for 7 years is not nothing, and when the surface finally breaks, what comes through is not always what you expect. He had been passed over for a promotion. The feedback was clear. Without a graduate degree, the path to senior leadership would be limited. He had enrolled in a legitimate master's program and completed the coursework over 2 years. He passed every class. He came within 1 semester of finishing. Then his program was absorbed into a restructured university system. His course credits were reclassified, and because of a technicality in how the transfer was handled, his degree was never formally conferred. He spent months trying to correct it. The bureaucracy was labyrinthine, lost records, unresponsive administrative offices, a program coordinator who had left the institution. He had the coursework. He had the transcripts. He did not have a piece of paper that said what the transcripts showed he had done, and he had a deadline. The position he wanted was closing. His manager liked him. He had done the work. So he made a decision. He listed the degree. He listed a school that, by the time the lie was told, no longer existed to contradict him. I told myself it was temporary, he said. I told myself I'd fix the records or go back and finish somewhere else, and then it wouldn't matter. But the fix never came, and the job did, and then the next job, and then he stopped. It stopped feeling like a lie after a while, which is maybe the most dangerous part. I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time after we hung up. I told Nathan that night. He listened without interrupting, his hands folded on the kitchen table. When I finished, he said, "What do you want to do?" I had been thinking about this for 4 days and I still didn't have a clean answer. I don't know yet. I know I'm not going to make a decision for him. I know I'm not going to pretend I didn't find out. Beyond that, what does he want to do? Nathan asked. I don't know. I didn't ask him yet. Nathan nodded. He got up and poured us both a glass of water and brought them back to the table. He sat down and didn't say anything because Nathan understands that silence is sometimes the most useful thing you can offer someone. The work is real, I said. Everything they said about him at that dinner, the turnaround, the team, the results, all of it is real. He did those things. I know, Nathan said. But the credential he's holding over it isn't. I know that too. I wrapped my hands around the glass. This isn't about whether he's capable. He's more than capable. He proved that 15 times over. I paused. But he built the whole thing on a piece of paper that was a lie, and at some point that matters. Not because of what he can do, because of what happens if someone else finds it first. Nathan looked at me. You think he knows that? I think he's known it for 7 years, I said. I think that's part of why he said yeah that fast when I asked. 3 days later, Marcus called me back. He said he'd been thinking since we talked, and he had made a decision. He was going to tell his company. Not because I asked him to, and not because he'd been caught, but because he had sat with it for 3 days and understood that carrying it alone wasn't something he could keep doing with integrity, and integrity, he said, was the only thing he actually cared about at this point. I'm going to ask for a meeting with HR and my direct supervisor, he said. I'm going to explain the whole situation, the coursework, the transfer issue, the records. I'm going to be honest about what I did and why, and I'm going to ask if there's a path forward. There might not be, I said. I know, he said. I've thought about that. You could lose the position. Yeah, the award they just gave you. I know. His voice was steady, not resigned, steady. There's a difference. I know all of that. I've been doing the math on it for 3 days. And I keep coming back to the same place. I can't stand on something that isn't solid. I can't do the work I care about from a foundation I know is hollow. Even if no one else ever finds it, I'd know. I didn't say anything. I just wanted to tell you, he said, because you're my sister, and because if the roles were reversed, I'd want you to tell me. We talked for another hour. About the process, what he might say, how he might frame the documentation question, the transcripts, the proof of coursework, the administrative failure that had contributed to the problem. Nathan had quietly put together a note about the university's closure timeline and how a third-party degree audit would likely interpret the situation, which I had passed to Marcus without making a production of it. Tell Nathan I said thank you, Marcus said before we hung up. Tell him yourself, I said. He laughed, and it sounded for the first time in days like the laugh I knew. My parents didn't find out until 6 weeks later when Marcus told them himself. He came home for a weekend and sat with them at the kitchen table the way we had both sat at that table for every serious conversation our family had ever had, the old one with the scratch in the upper right corner from a mishandled moving box 20 years ago. He told them from the beginning, calmly, without asking for a verdict before he'd finished. My mother cried, but not the way she had at the dinner. My father sat very still and listened all the way through, and when Marcus finished, my father was quiet for a moment and then said, "You went in and told them yourself?" "Yes," Marcus said, "before they found out." "Yes." My father nodded. "Yes." My father nodded. Once. The same nod from the banquet hall, the one he used when something mattered enough that words felt inadequate. "Okay," he said. "Then that's the part we're going to focus on." My mother reached across the table and put her hand over Marcus's. She didn't say anything right away. Then she said, "You are not only this mistake, you know that." Marcus said he knew, but I think he needed to hear it anyway. I think we all do, when we've been carrying something alone for a long time and we finally put it down. We need someone to look at the full weight of it and say, "This does not define the borders of who you are." His company put him on a 60-day administrative review. During that time, they commissioned an independent verification of his work history, spoke with team members, and reviewed the documentation Marcus provided regarding the university situation. He was not terminated. What they found, what the review showed, was that the credential was listed incorrectly, that there was a documented institutional failure in the degree transfer, and that the body of work spanning his entire tenure with the company was consistent and verifiable. They required him to formally complete the remaining course credits for his degree through an accredited institution, which he enrolled in within the week. The regional director title was held during the review. It was reinstated after. He called me the day he got the news. I was at work, and I stepped into the hallway to take it. "They're keeping me," he said. I leaned against the wall and exhaled. "They were fair about it," he said. "Fairer than I probably deserved." "You told them the truth before you had to," I said. "That matters." "It mattered to them," he said. "I wasn't sure it would." "People can surprise you," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "How's Nathan?" "Good," I said. "He'll be glad to hear this." I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't said something. I thought about that, about the banquet hall, the champagne glass, Nathan's hand on my back, the way he had leaned down and said those 6 words and then straightened up like nothing had happened and let me have the rest of the evening before I had to carry the weight of them. "I think you do know," I said. "I think you know exactly what would have happened." He didn't argue with that. "We don't talk about it constantly. It's not the central fact of our relationship now, and I don't think it should be. Marcus is still my brother, the same one who drove 3 hours to help me move into my first apartment, who called me on the day Nathan proposed because he somehow already knew, who has shown up every single time I actually needed someone. None of that changed. What changed is smaller and harder to name. It has to do with the thing underneath the story, not the lie itself, but the 7 years of maintaining it, the slow way a private dishonesty can hollow something out, even when everything on the surface looks solid. I think Marcus knows that now in a way he didn't before. Not because I told him, but because he told himself, in 3 days of sitting alone with it. I think about Nathan sometimes, about the moment in that banquet hall. He didn't make a scene. He didn't intercept the award. He didn't do anything except lean down and say 6 words and then let me decide what to do with them. That's its own kind of love, I think. The kind that hands you the truth and then steps back and trusts you to know what to do. I don't take that for granted. A few weeks ago, Marcus came to visit. He and Nathan stayed up past midnight at the kitchen table talking about the credentialing system, about institutional accountability, about what it means to have done work that is real and not have the paper trail that matches. It was not a comfortable conversation. It also didn't need to be comfortable to be worth having. At some point, I got up to refill my water, and I stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, looking at the two of them. My husband, careful and precise, who loves me by telling me the truth, and my brother, who spent 7 years afraid of what the truth would cost him, and then found out the cost of carrying it was higher. They were both in their own ways, trying to figure out how to live with integrity. That's not a small thing. It might be the only thing, in the end, that any of us are really trying to figure out. I went back to the table. I sat down, and we kept talking.